The Data Collectors. Written by Danielle Palli. Narrated by Graham Mack and Danielle Palli. 4. The Man in the Black Fedora. Friday afternoon, 5 years after the assembly. It wasn't often that Lucine went grocery shopping in the middle of the day on a Friday. Come to think of it, it wasn't often that Lucine went grocery shopping at all. But there she was, loading up her green box-shaped motor vehicle on a rainy afternoon, trying to unlatch the tailgate with one hand while attempting to balance her produce-filled cloth bags with the other. She wasn't having much luck.
God damn it!
She cursed as several apples and oranges and 2 Spanish onions rolled out of the bag she'd propped against her thigh that headed straight into a puddle. As she leaned down to retrieve them, her shopping cart began rolling away with her small leather backpack in tow. Abandoning the fallen spoils, she ran after the cart, though not before the tailgate had chanced to coax her along by smacking her bottom. Lucine let out a few more expletives, cursing the rain, her matted, wet pixie cut, and the melted hair mousse that burned her eyes as it ran down her forehead. "May I be of some assistance?" Tanager asked, catching the shopping cart mid-flight and spinning it around with one hand. He was standing next to a lamp-post, holding a bright red umbrella with his other hand. She could barely make out his round features beneath the black hat he wore and the upturned collar of his grey trench coat.
I'm okay, thanks.
Lucine gave a gracious nod, snatched the cart, and proceeded to roll it back to her car. Hunching her shoulders as the rain grew heavier, it pummeled her neck and back. Water had now successfully soaked its way through her long-sleeved grey cotton t-shirt and jeans. For once, she was grateful that she'd remembered to wear a bra. "At least allow me to shield you from the rain while you collect your groceries." He was persistent, sheltering her with the red umbrella as he fell into a quick step beside her. He wasn't much taller than Lucine and struggled not to accidentally poke her with the point of one of the umbrella's metal ribs. To his own discomfort, he endured the rain, making a loud patter as it rudely smacked the rim of his fedora. He had a strange energy about him. Lucine could almost feel it, as if their skin were touching even though there was more than a foot of space between them.
Okay, but I don't want to be a bother,"
she answered nervously, slinging her backpack over one shoulder and giving the cart a shove, watching as it sailed into the cart return, clanging against the other carts in its path. She bent over the puddle and scooped up the fallen fruits and vegetables, decided they were still good, and tossed them haphazardly into a cargo bin in the back of her car and slammed the tailgate shut. Tanager waited patiently as Lucine awkwardly fumbled with the tailgate lock.
"Well, that's that. Thanks so much."
The man didn't respond.
Good day to you, sir."
She tried to dismiss him a second time. "It was my pleasure." He tipped his soggy hat and continued to cover her head with the umbrella until she felt safely in the driver's seat. She felt her heart speed up just a little. She sucked in a deep breath and held it momentarily. Lucine didn't like to think she was the kind of woman who thought the worst of people. But it wasn't every day that strange men went out of their way to help her. Other women, yes, but she never felt herself the sort who would warrant that kind of attention, unless the intentions were bad ones. She kept a sidelong glance at the stranger standing outside of her car as she revved the engine. The green monster gave a pathetic shudder as the engine died.
"Come on, Kermit. Not today."
She revved it again and again. Nothing.
God damn it.
She hung her head with a sigh. She watched as this strange man in the black fedora gave a slight knock on the driver's side window. She let out another deep sigh and strong-armed the window handle, rotating it just enough to produce a small opening between the top of the window and the roof. "If I may suggest," he offered, pressing his lips up toward the open space as if it were a microphone. "My car is just over there." He pointed to a small blue compact car sitting in the otherwise empty lot. "Perhaps I could give you a lift." You can get your perishables home and we can have a look at what's troubling your vehicle after the rain has stopped. What do you think?
While I appreciate the offer, you should get out of the rain and quit worrying about me.
Lucine bit the corner of her lip.
I'll just phone my roommate and ask her to pop around the corner and pick me up.
She fished through her backpack as if searching for something. Very well, Tanager conceded, mouthing the word pop as if it confused him. She tried not to look too relieved. I'll just wait in my car over there until you've made your call, just to make certain you have assistance on the way. You can, he paused a moment to think, give me a wave as an all clear that help is on the way. He puffed up his chest and smiled, as if satisfied with his choice of words.
Sounds like a plan.
Lucine smiled uncomfortably. He paused again, as if processing what she said, before flashing a smile and darting off to the warmth of his dry little car. Lucine picked up the closest item that looked like a phone, a small black notepad, and held it up to her ear, pretending to have a conversation. She glanced over at the man waiting patiently in his car, his fingers rhythmically tapping the wheel as if he were listening to music. From what she could see, he appeared to be clean-shaven, with a small, nondescript nose and a medium complexion. His eyes were masked by the hat, but she could make out a tangle of curly blonde hair creeping down from the edge of it. The colour hers used to be before she dyed it to an unobtrusive brown and chopped it off. He looked relatively normal, but that didn't mean anything. It was then she noticed his mouth was moving. Was he singing? She grinned in spite of herself. A sudden flash of lightning, followed closely by a loud thunderclap, jolted her out of her momentary distraction. She dropped the notepad and tried to start Kermit. Still dead. Lucine quickly weighed the options. She could run the 50 yards back into the grocery store and ask to use their phone, if only she could actually remember her home phone number. After all, she never phoned herself, or anyone for that matter. She could ditch the groceries and walk 4 miles back home, or she could let the strange man in the black fedora give her a lift. A wave of electrostatic flashes streaked across the sky overhead as lightning struck the ground in several places at once, the boom of thunder in her ears indicating that the storm was now directly overhead. The sky grew dark as if nightfall had arrived early. The lights of the supermarket went out in synchronicity. Such was par for the course in the lightning capital of the world. Ironic that she chose to live in Florida, considering how much she hated thunderstorms. It was almost as much as she hated the cold. That was why she moved to Florida in the first place, wasn't it? She couldn't quite remember. No, that wasn't it. You must protect yourself, Lucine. The words came back to her, as if she were hearing them for the first time. But several years later, and she still couldn't figure out what exactly it was she was supposed to be protecting herself from, although invisible forces seemed to loom over her in her mind's eye. Still, everything had been completely normal since her arrival in Florida. Well, almost normal. The heavens picked that moment to finally open the floodgates as a torrent of drops beat loudly on the top of her car. She shivered uncomfortably as fear overtook her, and that sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach returned. She gazed down at the brown patterns on her arm. Were they glowing? No, it couldn't be. At that moment, she spotted a shadow out of the corner of her eye, and then it was gone. She tried to dismiss it as a side effect from the lightning strike, but if she had to be honest with herself, she suspected she was being followed. It happened many times over the past few weeks, to mean nothing. Of the 2 potential threats, at least she could see one of them. And what she could see, she reasoned she could do something about. Lucine reluctantly rolled down her window just enough to call over to Tanager, who was still sitting in his car, singing to himself. He stopped singing abruptly at her beckoning.
Not having much luck, I'm afraid. If it wouldn't be a terrible bother, I'd like to take you up on that offer for a lift.
It's no bother at all, he called back. Moments later, the headlights of his car came to life as he made a U-turn and pulled up beside her. Lucine quickly jumped from her car and ran to unlock the tailgate. Please allow me, he offered. Tanager opened the passenger door of his car and motioned for her to climb inside. I will retrieve your groceries, madam. Lucine somewhat reluctantly took a seat, allowing him to close the door after her. She glanced over her shoulder as he, one by one, snagged her grocery bags and settled them into the trunk. Close, he commanded of her car, but the tailgate remained open. Close, he commanded again. Curious, Lucine thought. She moved to roll down her window but couldn't find the controls. She motioned him through the window, symbolically turning a key. He nodded in understanding, locking up her green monster and snatching her keys from the latch. Here you are, he handed them back to her as he sank into the driver's side. I should have assumed it required a key turn. Lucine forced a smile. Taking the keys with one hand while keeping the other on the door handle, mentally making a plan in case she needed to make a hasty exit. Weren't grocery stores the number one place where women got attacked by rapists? Alarmingly, she wasn't entirely sure how to open this car door. There were no visible latches.
You're very kind, Mr.
It was only then that Lucine noticed the rental sticker on the windshield. She felt the colour draining from her face.
It's not even his car registered in his name. He could be anyone from anywhere.
Tanager, he smiled warmly, displaying a mouthful of perfectly aligned teeth. He put out his hand cordially.
It's nice to meet you, Mr. Tanager.
Lucine reached across her chest with her right hand. He looked as if he were about to kiss it, so she quickly gave his hand an abrupt shake. She jumped slightly as a static electric shock ran up her arm. She released his hand and returned to clutching the car door handle.
My name is Lucine.
Even after 5 years, it felt strange using her given name, but for some reason, she no longer felt safe using the nickname she'd grown accustomed to for many years. Plus, changing her name gave her the illusion that she could somehow shed her past just as easily as she had discarded the name Lucy. Lucine! He repeated the name slowly, as if saying it for the first time. What a beautiful name, he declared, his brown eyes lighting up, as if he were a small child who was just handed a big cone full of cotton candy. He tapped the steering wheel and started the engine. Oh, he said as he released the brake. Tanager is my first name.
Unusual.
Lucine crinkled her eyebrows and pursed her lips as if trying to figure something out. I could say the same about Lucine. Tanager glanced in her direction as he left the near-empty lot and turned down the main strip that crossed in front of the deserted shopping centre. In my case, my family loved birds. My mother's name was Wren, and I suppose she thought she was being clever. Lucine smiled. For real this time, letting her shoulders relax ever so slightly away from her ears. He didn't feel like a rapist, she thought. Where am I going? He asked.
Just over there. Turn right at the stop sign. I'm a few miles down.
She contemplated whether or not to point out someone else's neighbourhood and walk the remainder of the way, but she already knew Tanager just well enough to suspect that he'd insist on helping her carry her bags inside. Besides, she didn't want to contend with the rain or the lightning or the strange shadows she kept seeing. Instead, she directed him down the small, winding street, past a series of horse and dairy farms and cottages surrounded by tangles of palmetto, magnolia, banyan, and oak trees, some of which were at least 100 years old. Several turns later, they concluded their journey.
Okay, make a left here and follow the dirt road to the yellow house at the end, she instructed. The one with the bright red door.
When they arrived, The driveway was empty. As anticipated, not only did Tanager insist on carrying her bags of groceries inside, but also in running around to the passenger's side in the rain and putting out his hand to assist her climbing out of the car. He handed Lucine his red umbrella. "Go ahead," he told her. "I will catch you. Catch up." Just then the rain stopped. Lucine folded the umbrella and shook it slightly before handing it back to him.
"Thanks. I'll open the window for us. Give me a second."
Tanager mouthed the words, "Give me a second," to himself. Odd, he thought, but assumed that he should simply wait a moment and then follow her through the window. She darted across the cobblestone pathway, bypassing the front door and heading around to the side of the house. Tanager watched her, curious. Lucine fumbled with her keychain and then inserted a small copper key into the window frame and slid it open. The window was just low enough where she could easily step over the ledge and plant a muddy shoe on the table that sat inside, just below the window.
"Hey, chica."
A short Rubenesque woman with wavy lavender hair that was long on one side and short on the other greeted her from inside.
"Why didn't you just ring the bell?"
She instinctively reached for Lucine's coat as the soggy roommate took a seat on their living room couch and tugged at her muddy shoes. She'd attend to the man she'd left holding the groceries in a moment, not wanting to leave dirty footprints all over the floor.
"I didn't see your car in the drive and assumed you left for work early." "Nah, Ivan's still trying to fix the compressor something or other for me. I swapped shift with another cook and I'm not due in for a couple hours." "Ah!"
She jumped, pointing wide-eyed at Tanager, who was skulking at the window. "So sorry, madam," he said apologetically. Where would you like your groceries?"
"Oh, Fatima, this is Tanager. Tanager, come around to the front door and Fatima will let you in. Oh, wait, here, hand me those."
She motioned to the bags of groceries still in his arms. Lucine took one and handed it to Fatima, and then grabbed the others and placed them on the nearby kitchen table. She once again motioned for him to go around to the front door. Tanager thought it best not to question why she had climbed through the side window in the first place.
"What happened?"
Her lavender-haired friend called as Lucine headed through the kitchen to the main entryway.
"Looks like your hair was replaced with a clump of soggy beach grass. Didn't think it was supposed to rain today." "It wasn't."
Lucine mumbled at her luck as she began unpacking the groceries and laying them out on the counter. From outside, a second band of rain passed over the house, and a thunderclap made them jump slightly. Fatima peered over her shoulder.
"Hey, where are the onions?" "They'll be along in a moment,"
Lucine answered with a nod toward the door. Fatima obliged, flinging the door open enthusiastically. Tanager had just enough time to run back to the car for the remaining goods, and now stood with cloth bags hanging on his arms like sandbags weighing down a boat. Fatima let out a high-pitched giggle that seemed to start out low from the depths of her heart and gradually go up the scale as it made its way out into the air.
"Here, let me help."
Fatima relieved Tanager of the bags of produce he was attempting to juggle and laid them one by one on the table. She gave Lucine a wink.
"I didn't know we were expecting visitors."
The man in the fedora paused to smile and tip his hat to her. Then, seeming to remember something, he pulled the hat from his head and held it to his heart, sending a small puddle of rainwater splashing to the floor. A tumble of curls fell around his face as he regarded the lavender-haired, grey-eyed woman who was only a few inches shorter than he, but considerably heavier. At that moment, in the far end of the living room, an all-black cat peered its golden eyes around the corner of a doorway. Seeing a stranger, he quickly retreated back into the bedroom, his tail twitching nervously.
"Okay, formal introductions are in order. Tanager, this is my roommate Fatima."
To Fatima, she offered.
"Tanager rescued me from the grocery store when Kermit flaked out again."
Lucine surveyed the pile of groceries on the table, bypassing the fruit in favor of a cinnamon roll she plucked from a pastry bag. "Fatima," Tanager emphasized the name as if committing it to memory, and bowed his head slightly. "Another lovely name."
"Well, he's certainly quite the charmer, isn't he?"
Fatima chortled. the laugh pulling up from her belly and resonating outward through her pursed, upturned lips. "Oh, no," Tanager answered seriously. "I don't practice magic, only science."
"I see,"
Fatima answered, shooting a wide-eyed glance at Lucine.
"Well, kind sir, may I offer you some water, a cup of coffee while you're here?"
Lucine shook her head in caution, munching absent-mindedly on a roll, as if on autopilot. But Fatima dismissed her. Tanager caught Lucine's glance and offered a practiced reply. "No, thank you. I'll just be on my way."
Thanks again for your help."
Lucine stared toward the kitchen door, stopping short of actually touching it.
"Surely you'll return to have dinner with us tomorrow night?"
Fatima was persistent, ignoring a "what do you think you're doing, are you crazy" glance from her friend and refusing to open the front door without an answer.
"I'll be making—"
She glanced with disdain at the Spanish onions.
"something other than a red onion chutney and goat cheese tartlets, I guess." "What, didn't I get the right onions?"
Lucine protested. This is why she rarely got grocery duty.
"No, these are Spanish onions. It's okay." "What's the difference?"
Tanager interrupted the banter. "I beg your pardon, I must be going. As for dinner, I don't think I should." He regarded Lucine's contorted face before she realized he was watching. She quickly replaced it with a smirk, leaning on the counter in what she hoped would appear to be a casual manner.
"You most certainly should. It's the least we can do after you rescued my friend from the grocery store. Ivan from next door is joining us too."
Fatima monitored toward the neighbor's house. "Very well then," he relented. "What shall I bring?"
"Just bring yourself and your scientific disposition. 6 p.m.
Fatima hastened him along before Lucine could protest again.
"You know your way out of the neighborhood, yeah?"
"I believe I can manage." Tanager snatched his hat and quickly placed it on his head. "Now about your car."
"No worries. I'll call for a tow after the rain stops, thanks."
Tanager didn't know what a tow was, but nodded politely. "Until tomorrow night." He tipped his hat and was gone. Fatima closed the door behind him.
"What the hell, Fatima? We don't know anything about him, and you invited him back into our home."
Lucine slapped her leg in exasperation.
"Well, you trusted him enough to let him give you a ride in the first place,"
Fatima replied as she dug through the grocery bag, unpacking an assortment of vegetables, lentils, and other bulk food items.
"Besides, you need to have more faith in people. He seems nice, and he certainly seems taken with you. I only let him give me a ride because I was low on options and I saw this. Never mind."
Lucine was too frustrated to argue.
"So assuming Ivan the Tinkerer gets your car finished in time, is there any chance you can give me a quick ride back to the store before your shift tonight? Kermit seems to fix himself after a rest, and I'm hoping he'll do better once he's had a chance to dry out a bit." "Sure, but I'll never understand how a 35-year-old car will magically spring back to life every time it stops working. I swear, sometimes it keeps running because it doesn't want to make you feel bad."
Fatima put the last of the groceries in the refrigerator, while Lucine tossed the cloth bags into the adjacent laundry room. Lucine couldn't explain it either. But up until today, she'd been lucky, and the green monster hadn't left her stranded. "You know, I could take a wee look at Kermit for you," a voice called from the window. Both ladies jumped at the unexpected voice behind them, remembering too late that the side window was still open with rainwater running across the sill and down the walls. On the other side, a red-haired, bulky man with a mustache and goatee grinned, placing his oil-stained hands on the sill. He didn't seem to notice the rainwater.
"That's okay, Ivan, but thank you."
Lucine declined.
"She doesn't trust anyone messing with her vehicle, and she won't buy a new one because she doesn't trust cars with computers in them."
"Ah!" Ivan nodded, in a way that really suggested that he had no idea at all what she meant, but was just being agreeable.
"That's not true, Ivan. I trust you. It's technology I don't trust." "Want to come in?"
Fatima invited. "Nah, gotta get back to the shop. Just wanted to let you know your car's ready. I left it on the drive." Ivan was very proud of his work, and Fatima listened intently as he filled her in on the step-by-step process from diagnosis to completion. He clearly wasn't in that much of a hurry after all. Lucine instinctively grabbed a small glass and spoon in order to mix herself an absinthe cocktail, before she remembered that she still had to go back and get her car that evening. She opted for soda instead. Within the next hour, the rain let up, and Fatima inched her petite yellow car up to Lucine's beat-up monster. Lucine hopped inside and revved the engine up first try.
Figures.
Fatima called over the rumble of the engine.
Hey, listen, my shift doesn't end until 2 a.m., but I'll keep my phone on in case you have any more problems. I'll just have to call you on my break. You do remember how a landline works.
Lucine wrinkled her nose and made a face.
Yes, I remember how phones work, smartass.
She reached for the car door, neglecting to mention to Fatima that while she knew how to work a phone, she couldn't for the life of her remember where it was in the house. The kitchen? The living room? She never saw a use for it and wasn't always the most observant of people.
I'm heading home anyway. I can make dinner for us if you want and leave a platter in the fridge. No thanks, chica.
Fatima laughed, knowing full well Lucine's inability to find her way around the kitchen.
I'll get something at work. You just get home safe.
Fatima waited just long enough to see that Lucine was safely on the road before taking off. As she looked in the rearview mirror, she commented to herself,
Her and her freaky cock armor.
5. Roman meets Fatima. Friday evening, 5 years after the assembly. It was 9:15 p.m. on Friday evening, and Roman wasn't having any fun at all. He pushed his way past a crowd of 20-something-year-olds, congregating around the house band at the entranceway to the Crab Shack on the Pier Bar and Grill. It wasn't so much that he hated crowds as much as he abhorred what he would call a lack of decorum. He detested it in himself as much as those around him. But then his emotions were a little irregular as of late. By the time he'd elbowed his way up to the bar, he had decided that this night's research would likely be a bust. Not only that, but he was certain his blood sugar levels were dropping. Nothing he ever had to worry about where he came from. "Gin and ginger beer," he told the bartender, as he clumsily inserted himself between an awkward man and woman who were occupying 2 bar stools at the edge of the counter. He smiled apologetically at the woman for accidentally nudging her elbow. They were attempting to have an intimate conversation while yelling above the noise. From his best estimate, it was their first date. Maybe not even a date. They likely met 2 hours earlier and were trying to determine where, if anywhere, their relationship might go. If Roman had to venture a guess, it would have been nowhere. "And," Roman added, "a bar menu, please, I'm famished." "Excuse me?" The overly confident and equally overweight man on the bar stool snorted. "If you hadn't noticed, the lady and I are trying to have a conversation. Do you mind?" The woman blushed.
It's okay.
She twirled a lock of her bleached hair around one finger and smiled sheepishly.
It's crowded. It's hard to get the bartender's attention.
The man glared impatiently at the interruption, the colour in his face rising as he gripped his beer. By then the bartender laid Roman's drink down. He thanked her, plunked a 20 on the bar, tucked the menu under his arm, grabbed his drink, and started to walk away. But he couldn't quite bring himself to. This was just the sort of situation that would aid in his research, and he was feeling much more brazen these days. "Actually," he turned to the now crimson man, "I did notice." "What are you talking about?" "I had noticed that you were trying to have a conversation." "Yeah? So you're just an asshole for no reason?" He laughed and nudged the pear-shaped woman who twirled her hair faster as she attempted to shrink into her stool. "If you'd really like to know," Roman answered matter-of-factly, "this woman has been politely trying to figure out how to get away from you for the past 20 minutes or so." The woman hunched her shoulders in a further attempt to condense herself. "She was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, figuring you were nervous by the way you kept tapping your thick fingers on the bar and clearing your throat for no reason. But the truth of the matter is, you're just an unhappy man with anger issues, and when you get right down to it, she's not attracted to you at all.
In fact, from what I've observed here tonight, she'd be much more interested in someone like me." "You got a lot of nerve." He struggled to slide off his bar stool. The woman perked up, holding back a smile as she looked up at Roman hopefully. "Oh, don't worry, I'm not in the least bit interested in your lady friend." The woman looked crestfallen. "I just wanted to be straight with you to save you both an entirely uncomfortable evening." The angry man clenched his fist, jerking his head in the blonde woman's direction. "Is that true?" She snatched her purse and cradled it in her arms uncomfortably. The man shot a spiteful glare at Roman. "Sir, I can see that I've made you angry. However, I was just trying to save you both considerable time and unpleasantness." "What are you, some kind of relationship expert?" "Well, I do consider myself well educated when it comes to matters of the heart." Without further comment, aside from a grunt, the angry man grabbed his sunglasses and pushed his way to the door, leaving his lady friend to close out the tab.
"Well, thanks for saving me anyway."
Roman was about to walk away when she stopped him.
"Hey, hang on a second. What's your name?"
"Roman." He paused as he quickly rotated through his mental Rolodex of human behavior before offering his hand to shake hers, remembering that kissing someone's hand is generally frowned upon, except in more personal settings. "And you?"
"Marcy,"
she answered, before continuing.
"Mind if I ask you a question, Roman?"
"I don't mind at all." He flashed a wide smile of perfect teeth.
"What's wrong with me?"
"Whatever do you mean?"
"Well, you seem to size that guy up right away, and my lack of interest, so I'm guessing you're pretty observant."
"Yes, very." He set down his drink and menu, and leaned his tall frame casually into the side of the bar, resting an arm on the counter. He wasn't being conceited. Roman was matter-of-fact about most things. As the bartender plunked the woman's tab onto the counter, he took a moment to mouth the words, "The ahi tuna, please," as he pointed to the menu. She nodded and kept moving.
"Well, what I mean is,"
Marcy tried again.
"what's wrong with me that a jerk like that would like me, but someone like you wouldn't find me interesting? I'm a nice person. I like to think I'm somewhat attractive."
"You're beautiful," he answered in earnest. A few passers-by stopped to look at her, then him, trying to determine if he were making a joke. Roman was, after all, considered handsome by most cultural standards. Black wavy hair that nearly reached his shoulders, bright green eyes, and a pale complexion that only made his eyes more striking. Conversely, it wasn't that Marcy was entirely unattractive, but she certainly didn't fit the norm. She had large arms with little definition and equally large breasts that looked as if they'd pop out of her tank top at any moment. The rest of her frame seemed out of proportion. Her perfume and makeup were as extreme as her suntan, all of which appeared to have been quite heavily sprayed on.
"Well, thank you."
She blushed.
"What is it about me that always ends up with people who take me for granted? Or someone like that guy seems rude and angry all the time?"
Roman considered the question more carefully, noticing that a few people surrounding them were straining to hear his response. Marcy had a look on her face. What was it? Fear, he realized, and knew at that moment that he could either crush or raise her spirits. The first option, he also realized, would in no way be to her benefit. Even in his cranky state, with his newfound penchant for saying exactly what was on his mind, he relented, sitting on the now unoccupied stool next to her. "From what I've observed," he chose his words carefully, "you have a kind heart, so much so that you'd likely sit for hours listening to an unpleasant man talk to you rather than hurt his feelings." Marcy turned redder and gazed at the floor, crumbling her lips together, embarrassed. "However, I've also intuited that you attempt to dress and behave in ways that you think will make others happy with you instead of being the kind of person you are happy with. Love yourself, and you will find love." Her eyes lit up, as if suddenly struck by an idea.
You know, you're right.
Marcy quickly fumbled with her purse, slid off her bar stool, and tugged at her bunched-up skirt until it untangled and hung just above her knees. At that moment the bartender set a small plate of ahi tuna with avocado and wonton crisps in front of him. Marcy rested a hand on Roman's arm as he was about to take a bite out of his food.
Thank you, Roman. What you said makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate your honesty. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
She slid a few bills under a coaster for the bartender before making her exit. You as well, lovely Marcy. By this time, Roman had drawn a crowd of female admirers along with a couple of men, each one asking him relationship questions. Finally, he took a bite out of his tuna appetizer. His eyes lit up and he smiled brightly. Suddenly, his evening had gotten better. "Excuse me," he called to the woman behind the counter. "Who made this exquisite dish?"
I don't know.
She turned to a server who had stepped behind the bar.
Hey, Sally, who's working the line tonight?
Sally looked up from the ice maker suspiciously.
Why, something wrong?
Not at all, Roman gushed. By then he'd already devoured half of his plate while a woman with her hair piled up on her head, held in place with several strategically placed pins, rested her hand impatiently on his arm.
What about me? She demanded,
batting long eyelashes at him. This Roman found annoying. He was through playing one part counselor and one part matchmaker. He was busy eating, after all. "Okay, last one," he announced, gazing at his team of admirers. "1 second," he told the woman. To the bartender he asked, "May I have another order of this, please?" "Thank you." He pointed to his dish. "And could you give my compliments to the chef? This is the most amazing food I've ever eaten." The bartender was too busy to roll her eyes, but her extended pause spoke volumes. But the more she brought him, the better the tips. So she nodded politely and grabbed a passing server to put the order in. "Are you a food connoisseur?" a small-framed man with spiked salt and pepper hair asked with a smile. "No," Roman admitted. "I just really like food." To the woman who refused to let go of his arm, he said, "I would offer that it is in your best interest to develop a strong sense of independence." He promptly relieved his arm of her grip and turned back to his gin and ginger beverage.
What's that supposed to mean? I'll never find someone? She pouted.
Unlike Marcy, it was evident to Roman that anything short of a harsh dose of reality would not get past this woman's emotional wall. "It means that your need to find someone may be scaring off your potential prey. Ease up a little. I think I speak for most men when I say," he leaned in flirtatiously as if sharing a secret with her, "confidence and an independent spirit are very attractive."
Oh, okay, thank you.
"No problem at all, and good luck." He snagged his drink and shouldered his way to a small, unoccupied pub table in the far corner of the room, hating not being able to savour his food on account of the perpetual interruptions. "Ah, well," he thought, "another should be along shortly." He drained his drink. He assumed his height worked to his advantage as he towered over the crowd. And yet, when he attempted to alert the bartender to his new location, his flailing arms went unnoticed.
"I hear the sashimi is awesome,"
a voice from below Roman spoke. He turned and dropped his gaze toward Fatima, who was holding up a second plate of the tuna sashimi. She set it down on his pub table. For the first time this week, Roman was in love. "Are you the chef?" he asked.
Chef is such a strong word for a place like this. How about cook?
"I would call you amazing." For the second time that evening, several onlookers dressed in designer garb and purses worth more than the average person's monthly rent seemed perplexed, horrified even. But when they gazed at Roman lovingly, it was clear to see that he wasn't telling a woman what she wanted to hear. He was speaking from his heart. Perhaps that's what made him so attractive. Fatima let out a full-bellied laugh. What a delightful laugh! Roman leaned an elbow on the pub table and rested his head in his hand.
Another charmer.
She smiled until her cheeks hurt. Unlike Tanager, Roman was completely versed in Earth culture. In addition to his vast studies in psychology, anthropology, and sociology, he was fully equipped with metaphors and terminology across many continents. So much so that he was contemplating writing a book about it when he got back home and entitling it How to Behave Like a Human in 30 Days or Less, as a guide for his fellow earthlings. "I have been told I'm charming, yes," he answered without the slightest hint of modesty. "What is your name, amazing cook?"
Fatima.
She once again let out that infectious laugh that rolled up her toes in a wave. Fatima. He was astonished, but tried not to show it. Could this be his Fatima? The one he had been searching for?
Hey, hang on a sec.
She broke the awkward pause. Fatima disappeared through the crowd, navigating her large frame effortlessly as Roman attempted to follow her with his eyes, hoping she hadn't gotten too far and was planning on coming back. A moment later, he saw a bottle of wine floating high in the air as Fatima re-emerged, carrying the bottle and a glass.
Try this,
she instructed.
It's a limited edition Chardonnay, and I know you'll like it with this particular dish.
She poured Roman a glass and waited for him to take a sip, followed by a taste of the tuna and avocado. "Even better than the last order," he complimented, trying to memorize her face. Fatima's cheeks blushed crimson as she kicked the base of the pub table nervously with her toe. She was not generally shy, but it wasn't often she was given such high praise from such an attractive admirer.
I gotta get back to the kitchen,
she motioned with a thumb over her shoulder.
I just had to meet the man who gave my food such rave reviews.
As she turned to leave, Roman touched her arm lightly. "I'm Roman, by the way," he told her hastily.
Well, it's very nice to meet you, Roman.
With that, Roman watched as his lavender-haired beauty with the mesmerizing grey eyes darted through the swinging door that led to the kitchen. He savoured the wine and sashimi for the next half an hour with a stupid grin plastered on his face. He was oblivious to the loud music, dancing and noise from the bar-goers around him. Someone might have accidentally elbowed him in the ribs a couple of times, but he couldn't be sure, and he certainly didn't care. Roman was confused. Tara had placed him in charge of studying love and the reproduction habits of the human population several years ago. Yet today he admitted to himself that his emotions had been getting the better of him, and he didn't know why. Had he been human for too long? Was his genetic coding changing, or is this just a result of conditioning? He'd have to make note of this in his report and have himself screened on his next Tara medical check-in. Surely what he was feeling could be labelled infatuation, couldn't it? This was an emotion he was becoming all too familiar with lately. Consequently, he had outlined the timeline of emotions that proved to be fairly consistent. The initial stages of puppy love, infatuation, and crushes only lasted about 2 or 3 months, longer for the unrequited. After the hormonal rush wore off, love sometimes developed, but only after that initial grace period. He was certain that love at first sight was a myth. Even more implausible is that he began to feel love before he'd even met Fatima. He picked up the loving energy that she put in her food. He knew from his research that emotions are vibrations, and it made sense that he'd feel love. But in love? Impossible. For the first time, he did what he swore he'd never do. He took a pen from his shirt pocket and scribbled his first name and number on a paper coaster. So there was no confusion. He wrote at the top, "For the cook called Fatima." He took his place by the swinging door that led to the kitchen as a classic country band took the stage, opening with their local hit, "Love Hit Me Like a Truck." The best way to describe Roman's behaviour at that moment was to say that he was doing a great job of skulking. As he skulked by the kitchen door, occasionally peering through the tiny circular window, a few of the servers became nervous. "Can I help you?" A beefy man who matched Roman's height but outweighed him by about 80 pounds of pure muscle asked in a low voice, resting a meaty hand on his shoulder. Roman glanced at the security badge attached to his black T-shirt. "Yes," Roman answered gratefully, completely missing the obvious. "Would you mind delivering this note to the cook who calls herself Fatima?" He pushed the note into the beefy man's chest. "If I pass this on, will you be on your way?" the beefy man inquired. "Oh, definitely, and I would be most grateful." The man snatched the note from him. "Good night, then." He made his way into the kitchen, stopping once through the doors to shoot a warning glance through the window on the off chance Roman decided to follow. Roman reluctantly pulled himself away from the door, and after giving himself a harsh talking to, decided to call it a night. He meandered quickly through the bustling crowd, keeping his head low to avoid eye contact, particularly with anyone he'd met earlier in the evening. Once outside, the unusually thick air enveloped him with a shroud of sticky heat. He spotted a few couples hastily making their way to their cars. He paused beside his small black electric vehicle and glanced back at the restaurant, where people were packed in like sardines in a can. Not a single person wanted to sit out by the dock with the temperatures rising, not falling, as the sun went down. "And still they're denying that climate change is real," he muttered angrily to himself as he got into his car. Instead, the powers that be blamed the abnormal weather patterns on the urban island effect and, of course, an act of God. He drove home in silence. Once Roman had reached his small condo, he kicked his shoes off by the door. He then stopped at the small efficiency kitchen and pulled a single ice cube from the freezer, walked across the room to the adjacent living room, and deposited it in the planter of a moth orchid that was blooming beside the window. "Sorry," he apologized to the orchid, closing the shade that remained partially open while he was gone. "I should have done that this morning." The room resembled a minimalist hotel room, with stain-resistant grey upholstery covering a small couch and chaise longue. Against the wall sat an espresso-coloured TV stand, and 32-inch flat screen that the stand seemed to swallow. He flopped on the couch and reached into the drawer of a small coffee table that was wedged between the chaise and the couch. Roman pulled out a notepad and pen. He wanted to get his notes from the evening down before he forgot anything. Instead, he started sketching aimlessly on the page. It wasn't until he got to the eyes that he realized what he'd done. He held the notepad away from him and smiled at the round face and lopsided hair. Fatima. It was only then that he noticed the phone in his shirt pocket was vibrating. One missed call.
"Hi, I hope this doesn't sound too forward, but I'm having a couple of friends over for dinner tomorrow night at 6-ish. Want to come? Here's the address."
Roman scratched his pen and scribbled down the address. Perhaps the evening wasn't so bad after all. 6. Ivan the Tinkerer. Friday evening, 5 years after the assembly. To Ivan's credit, he never asked a lot of questions. It wasn't that he didn't care as much as he thought it best he did not know. If he didn't know, then he couldn't be held responsible for sharing. He liked to dance a fine line that few can imagine, that of being morally neutral. Less inclined to label anything as inherently good or bad, he preferred to make decisions based on practicality and its benefit to the whole. Somewhat reclusive, his neighbours had taken to referring to him as Ivan the Tinkerer, as he spent most of his time in a small commercial garage behind his house, rumoured to have more inventions in the works than Da Vinci or Edison ever had. As with many inventors, It all started quite by accident. As a teenager, he noticed he had an uncustomarily thick auburn hair that coiled tightly and grew faster than a kudzu plant, an unfortunate reality that required he shave almost daily. His first invention was his home-crafted laser hair removal system that left a noticeable scar under his chin. He now alternates between a goatee and a beard because it's easier than explaining. After a series of fails, an electromagnetic weight reducer that provided first-degree burns, a voice-activated drone equipped with a flashlight and miniature toolkit that mistakenly propelled a ratchet handle whenever he said, "Screwdriver flathead," and a gas spring-foot propeller intended for home use that would eliminate the need for a footstool that was largely functional but required a considerable amount of balance. He finally made it big at the age of 37, when he introduced the world's first portable 3D printed micro-tool car repair kit. Sale of said invention to people who could actually market it netted him a comfortable retirement and the luxury of spending his days doing what he liked best, creating tools to make the world a safer and more efficient place. Late into the evening, Ivan was busy working on an engine that didn't really exist. Hunched over a laptop that rested precariously on the edge of a table, he typed a code with his 2 meaty index fingers. The computer would beep, he'd scratch his head, and wipe his fingers on his hole-ridden t-shirt, as if he were cleaning his hands of the formula, hit delete, and try again. Meanwhile, a car engine, a real one, sat helplessly on the garage floor awaiting its fate. A hollow knock on one of the doors brought him out of his quandary. Remembering their agreement, he retreated to the back of the garage, opening a small side door to greet his guests. "Good evening," Tanager smiled in his affable way. "You must be Ivan." "I am that," Ivan bellowed. "Cepheus! Good to meet you finally. Come in." "Thank you, but I am Tanager. I believe my friend Cepheus said that you were expecting us." Ivan's intellectual capacities made it difficult for him to connect to the average person, particularly in social gatherings. As a result, 2 years ago, he'd taken to posting to a private inventor's blog where like-minded tinkerers could share ideas and ask for advice without, he had hoped, giving away too many trade secrets. Marker 197 showed up in their invitation-only chat room one day, and a friendship was formed. It was only when Cepheus requested room and board for a few days that the two learned one another's names. And this was after more than a year of online communications. Cepheus and a colleague would be in Ivan's neck of the woods, and both needed a place to stay. They could pay handsomely for room and board if Ivan could be counted on for discretion, as Cepheus claimed to be working on a special project and didn't want competitors to know he was in town. To Cepheus's surprise, Ivan offered to put them up for a few days in the 2 spare guest rooms in his home. But he didn't want money. He wanted mathematics. "Ah, yeah," Ivan shook Tanager's hand heartily. "Good to meet you. Friend of Cepheus." Tanager waited for Ivan to ask where Cepheus was, and a long, awkward silence ensued, while one person waited for the other to speak. Ivan leaned against a wooden table, looped his thumbs in the belt buckles of his jeans, and stared expectantly. Finally, Tanager broke the silence. "So Cepheus is just getting a few things out of the car, and will be along momentarily." "Ah, good. I have the rooms all ready for you both." "Thank you." Tanager paused cautiously. "There's just one thing I should tell you first, so that you're not caught off guard." Cepheus didn't wait for the invitation. He peered his head around the door like a tentative cat, as if to gauge the safety of his arrival. Even in his relatively normal state,
He still had sharp, vampire-like features, a pointy chin and ears, and sallow eyes. The grey patch of hair on his head was thin at best. He blinked nervously at Ivan, like a frightened animal. Tanager cautiously waited for Ivan's reaction, but Ivan seemed oblivious.
"Cepheus, old boy, nice to finally meet you. Get over here."
Cepheus floated over to his friend, who gave him a bear hug and slapped him on the back. He returned the sentiment with a soft pat on Ivan's back.
"Let me get you situated. I'll help you with your bags." "Thank you, my friend," Cepheus answered in his deep, resonant voice that didn't seem to match his lanky frame. "We have travelled light." Tanager was puzzled. It had only been a few years since non-humans had been allowed to freely travel to the United States, and only those representing foreign relations were permitted to live here as temporary residents. And yet Ivan showed no visible reaction to Cepheus's rather unique appearance. Perhaps he was premature in asking Cepheus to wait in the vessel until Tanager thought it appropriate he could be present. "I have some news for you," Cepheus whispered excitedly to Ivan as the tinkerer hoisted a bag from the back of their vehicle before Cepheus could protest. "I can't wait to hear it," Ivan smiled back. "I think I may have the solution to your battery algorithm quandary." Cepheus's eyes lit up. "God bless you, I've been fighting with that voltage and timing all evening. If you've got a solution, I swear I'll build you your own damn guest house next time you visit." Tanager followed soundlessly behind the two men, who were busy chatting in hushed tones like school children sharing secrets. While he was happy to see Cepheus returning to his normal self, he questioned their anonymity, his trust in a virtual stranger, and Lucine's safety. The thoughts weighed heavily on his mind as he allowed Ivan to escort them into his home. How much had Cepheus actually shared with this human? He turned pale as he soon found out. "Just one question, if you don't mind," Ivan asked Cepheus as he put the bags down in the hallway. "Did you manage to conceal your spacecraft at the preserve properly? Or do I need to do a recon?"